Hey guys, Primal Chaos here. Welcome to the channel. And, you know, for as long as I've had this channel, I haven't been able to get a haircut. As you can see, it's getting disastrous and out of control. And for about that same amount of time, you guys have been asking me to do Periphery. So today we're going to correct that. I'm not getting a haircut, sadly, because I'm still in lockdown. But, you know, maybe we can solve one of those problems right now. Now, I don't know anything about Periphery. All I know is that they're probably pretty technical, maybe math metal kind of things, so I'm expecting to probably just get blown away by a lot of crazy blast beats and not be able to siphon too much information off because I'm overwhelmed. But we're going to do our best today. Yeah, and you know, I really wanted to get to something a little bit more eclectic in that regard. You know, some really proggy sort of stuff, and hopefully this one hits the mark. Now, I did a poll, and as I said, I don't know anything about Periphery, so I just picked 4 songs off YouTube, did a poll, and Blood Eagle was the one that came out on top. Now, from what I understand, all of these are pretty newish. I could be wrong, but we'll see what happens. Like, and I mean, if this song is a particularly new song and it's not really, you know, evident, like, of, you know, not really representative of their journey as artists, then we'll go back and deep dive and do some more. I'd imagine we'll probably end up doing a lot of Periphery, but let's just jump right in. Learning about Periphery, Blood Eagle. Let's do this. Oh. We come for war, king of the northern lies. When drums beating, streets repeat, making an ever voice of war. So when you're not enough, the Christian seed will stand amongst the soil of trap. Okay, already got a lot to talk about. So I'm guessing this is Gent, right? It's one of those things I've always, you know, if you've been on YouTube and you watch a lot of guitar-related YouTubes, Gent comes up all the time. But because I've never really dived deep into the genre of music, I have trouble identifying it. But to me, this is, I mean, it sounds like there's all that's coming out of the guitars is Gent. There really isn't much pitch going on. It's all so detuned that it's all just rhythm and dissonance. And that's all they're providing. And that's actually really interesting. Coming from, you know, a background in guitar where I grew up listening to, I mean, at the time when I started playing guitar, it was all like, we were all retroactively playing blues riffs, right? Artists like Slash was a big inspiration, and, you know, anything, all the guitar soloing and stuff like that was really kind of blues based to a degree. And then there was a lot of virtuosic players like your sort of Nuno Betancourts of the world, or, you know, I mean, I'm just struggling to pull things out of the air right now, but you get the idea. But I mean, essentially it was all very blues related, or neoclassically related. And so one thing that's been interesting, you know, with like the advent of emo and metalcore and deathcore and all of these sort of, when I say more modern and more new, I mean like, you know, 2000s based sort of stuff, is that guitar became more of a rhythmic thing rather than a melodic thing. And so you end up with a lot of challenging sort of dissonant sounds. Korn were an innovator in that as well. First time I heard Korn, my initial thought, I think it was, what album was it? It was it, maybe it was the song Blind. I don't honestly remember, but it was prior to, you know, Got the Life and all those songs. It was before that. And I just remember hearing the sound of the instruments, and I took the headphones off. I was at a listening station at the job I was at, listening to CDs. And I was like, oh, I don't know if the world's ready for this sound yet. And it was because it was just pure dissonance. There was no melody to it at all, no harmony. And then, you know, that took off and became a thing. And so, I mean, all of this, you know, as much as you may not think of Periphery and trace that back to, you know, bands like Korn, and I don't know, Periphery may have been around a lot longer than that, but this particular style of music, a lot of it, you could sort of say, at least in my estimation, how I track things through time, is influenced by a lot of what Korn were doing back in the day, of just all of those sort of like really unnatural sounding, dissonant sort of rhythm sort of things going on, you know.
There's probably a bunch of people laughing at me right now going, dude, you have no idea. This stuff's been around a lot longer than that. Possibly. But I can only tell you from my experience, right? So anyway, let's go back a bit. I just want to hear some more. Also timing. Yeah, there's a lot of drop beats through all of this. You know, every time you think it's going to zig, it zags. See, that's why you do it, right? Because you give people an entire verse of really no harmonic content in the guitars, so that when you bust out like even just a pretty simplistic guitar riff like that, suddenly the whole world opens up. It's this great contrast. Like, listen to that, right? It sounds like as soon as they get into that part, it sounds like the entire song opens up, because suddenly there's some melody in the guitar parts. And you don't need to do anything overly complex, you know? In a band where so much is going on, they did so much with so little, just in that little change up. That's really interesting. Really interesting. Wow, okay, so the lyrics seem to be about like Nordic warriors attacking, maybe attacking Britain, because they're talking about show Valhalla glory and memory, let the Christians sing. Rip the body from the bone now, spread the heavens wings. Yeah, wow. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reference to Norse mythology there, with, you know, referencing hammer force of Thor. I mean, King of North and Norse, right? Surrender not enough. Christian seed will sing amongst the soil of trees. Yeah, so yeah, the blood of the Christians will fertilize the forests, basically. Maybe I might be misinterpreting that, but let's go back a little bit. Man, that's loud and brutal. It's so cool. Wow. What is going on? The burning stench of afterlife. No rays from heaven, only high side. Okay, I'm sorry. I gotta go back. I'm not sure exactly what happened then. Are we doing it? What's that groove? That's a really interesting vocal melody there. I don't know if it fits 100% in with the key, but I mean, I could be wrong on that one. That's, but man, it sounds haunting, right? And it sounds almost like a traditional melody, like a tribal melody from the era that they're trying to sort of evoke, which is interesting. The burning stench of afterlife, no rays from heaven, only high side. And how he brings that fry in at the end there, man, sort of a really cool note that evolves. And a big note too, sort of jumps up pretty high, and then he sort of held, and then, sorry, it's early. And then the, he sort of brings in that sort of compression and breaks up the note towards the end. Now we're getting screamo. Oh, good note. Hang on, let's hear that again. That was just interesting vocal acuity to be able to just bounce up to that note. Now you're speaking my language. Oh! See, now that's an interesting concept. You got your lead guitar player just busting out all the chops he's got. But then we're going to let our rhythm guitarist shine and show you exactly where this whole gent thing comes from, right? That's really nice. Hang on, I got to hear some of that again, because there's some interesting techniques going on in there. When I say it's hard to formulate a solo over a rhythm like that, where the accents are on just really odd beats, it's tricky. And the way he's countered that is by basically playing at a consistent rhythm through that whole passage, and then then I notice he sort of double times it up a little bit, or just changes, the profile of the notes he's playing a little bit to sort of add more tempo to it. So you'll notice he was doing a little bit of tapping there as well. I've talked about that before, but you can see exactly what he's doing. So it's where, you know, your hands are only so wide, so you can only play typically like maybe a 5 to 6 note stretch comfortably between all the frets on the fretboard, depending on where you are. And so, you know, what he's doing there is he's tapping further up, so he can play a note up here that this finger wouldn't be able to reach. And it also gives you more fingers to work with. And I mean, there's techniques that go all the way up to 8-finger tapping, where you're playing with all 8 fingers on the fretboard, almost like a piano. But typically you'll hammer the note on up here and then pull it off to get sort of like sort of vibe. And you can see him doing it exactly right there. See, to me, that rhythmic part after the solo is actually slightly more interesting because that is playing to the drum rhythm, right? All the accents are being hit. And that's super interesting. Like, it's one thing, like, don't get me wrong, I don't want to diminish that. That was a very cool guitar solo. It took an extraordinary amount of talent to achieve it. But for me personally, it's harder to write guitar riffs that are snappy and catchy and that fit in with all of the crazy accents of the drums. And I mean, that's just my personal journey. To me, that seems like the harder thing to do than a noodly sort of solo. And again, great solo, but this part is what really speaks to me after the solo ends. Come on.
We come for one, king of the northern ice. With drum beating, scream repeating, in the air with a voice of God. Surrender enough. For when we bleed, round days, everyone tonight.
Just great guitar rhythm sort of textures there, obviously doubled by... Is there a bass player? I keep on falling into this trap of saying the bass player, and in a lot of bands there isn't a bass player. I haven't been paying attention. There, yeah, there is. Is that... No? Seems like there's an extra dude. Okay, I'm genuinely confused. Is there a bass player in Periphery? Because I just looked for a good 30 seconds. I didn't see anyone. I just see a lot of Ibanez 7 strings or 8-string headstocks or whatever. Let's take a look. Periphery band members. This is so embarrassing. Because it's getting so hard to tell. Yeah, there's no bass player listed. Lead guitar. Wait. That person doesn't have it. Maybe that's the vocalist. Why does Periphery have 3 guitarists? Boom! I got you this time. I made the mistake of asking how come I haven't really noticed the bass player in Lorna Shore. And that's because there isn't one. It's just not necessary with how everyone's detuned now, right? I mean, bass players of the world are going, you don't know what we do. And trust me, I understand what you do. And to be fair, I mean... There is some room in this mix to put like a bass guitar, but I just, if anything, it might affect the tightness because a lot of times with really, really sharp, direct sort of genty riffs like this, it would actually physically be difficult for a bass player to keep up. And that's nothing against bass players. It's just semantics. Like if you just look at a bass guitar's fretboard, like the fingerboard on a bass, I mean, obviously the scale length is a lot longer. So the gap between the frets, like 4 frets, on a bass is a stretch, right? Now, if you compare that to a guitar, you know, 5 frets easily to be able to play that rapidly on a bass guitar, you'd have to physically be moving your hand that fast, and it's just not feasible. And I mean, obviously, bass players are very clever at coming up with different octave sort of variations and things like that. There's always a solution. But, and I'm not saying that bands shouldn't have bass players. They, in my estimation, bass players, in my experience, have actually been some of the most important band members that are in the band, particularly my band. But it's one of those things where, you know, then with the way that guitar players are sort of thinking about guitar now and rhythmically, and how they're detuning their guitars and using like things like, you know, the advent of an 8-string. An 8-string is basically a bass in the lower end anyway. It's like the high notes, the high strings of a bass. So it's a tricky conundrum, but I mean, these guys seem to be getting away with it. So who am I to judge, right? I think that they're doing a great job. And to be fair, it took me, I had to look into it to figure out if there was in fact a bass player, because, you know, it's already so low. So, you know, whatever. I say go with what works, right? Hang on, I feel like I need to give that outro a little bit more room to breathe.
We come through.
Great scream. I mean, gent really is about those pinch harmonics, isn't it? I can't demonstrate it because I haven't got a guitar plugged in at the moment. But essentially, a pinch harmonic is those squeals you hear, those sort of notes. And the way that they're done is you'll get your pick, and as you're plucking the string, oh, can you hear that? Like if I play the note, it just plays like a note. But if you deaden the string with the fleshy part of your finger as you pluck it, it stops the note from vibrating at its full oscillation, and it just plays like a harmonic overtone. Almost like I've been looking into Tibetan throat singing lately, and that whistling sort of sound that they're able to produce over their sort of mid-range sort of note, you can hear this. That's a harmonic, right? It's like an octave higher in the spectrum. It's part of the tonal characteristic of the note. When I play the note, the harmonic's there, you just don't hear it because it's mixed in with everything else. But if you just isolate, let me see if I can. That's a harmonic, right? And so that's all I'm doing is playing the note. Sort of. Let me see if I can figure out where I can sit. I'm playing the note, but as I do it, this part of my finger follows the pick and sort of just brushes lightly on the string, just enough to take off most of that vibration. And you're left with just like this really sort of octave higher kind of sound. Like that. And you hear that a lot in this sort of music where you'll have like, you know what I mean? And just in case some of you who aren't guitar players are wondering what that sound is, it's a technique that's, it's a little tricky to learn at first. You know, sometimes it takes people a little bit to get that. Mostly because it works way better when you've got a loud amp with heaps of distortion or gain. And it allows your pickups to really sing and squeal. And so if you're starting out and you've got a little bedroom amp that sort of sucks and it doesn't have particularly good sound, which isn't as much of a problem now because, you know, people learn on their computers with a whole bunch of amp sims and stuff like that. But when I was growing up and you had an amp like this big sitting in your bedroom, you try to do those pinch harmonics and they just sounded awful, you know. And so it took a little bit of practice to sort of get them right. And it seems to be a real fundamental part of this type of music. So that's just a little anecdotal thing you might not have been aware of. We'll be right back. Hey guys, we all know periphery is a vision thing. You know what else is a vision thing? Colorblindness. And, you know, 1 in 6 guys, 1 in 200 women are colorblind. That might be you. And if it is, there's something you can do about it. Click the link in my description. It'll take you to Enchroma where you can get an eye test, find out what kind of colorblindness you have, and maybe while you're there, pick up some corrective lenses. They've got frames to suit everybody and a 60-day money-back guarantee. So, yeah, you got nothing to lose. If you do decide to pick up some frames, just use the code CHAOS at the checkout and you'll get 10% off. Tell them Primal Chaos sent you. Okay, so a lot of you guys were really excited for me to check out Periphery. And, you know, I've been getting requests for this for quite a long time. And you're dead bang on. This was really cool. As I've mentioned before, like I'm not familiar with these sorts of bands in that, as far as like prog and like progressive metal sort of stuff. But maybe not so much into the gent territory. Like bands like Dream Theater and Symphony X and bands like that, which are very technical and progressive in their playing and sound and stuff like that. I'm pretty familiar with. This is a little bit more of an aggressive kind of thing for me. And what probably would have kept me away would be the harsh vocals, which obviously now I'm a fan of. So it's interesting that I'm discovering these sort of bands a bit later than everyone else. But you know what? It's never too late. Like I said, life is long and things come to you when it's the right time. And I think that it's really the right time for me to sort of enjoy these sort of bands. Look, technically, they're just brilliant. They, great playing, rhythmically. Like, one thing you'll never see on my channel is me sitting there counting out measures. Because one, I'm terrible at it. I just keep getting distracted by offbeats and things like that. I'm counting away, and then suddenly they'll drop a beat, and I'll still be counting the next. I'm like, 8, what? No, 7. Wait, and I've already lost track, right? So I'm not, being that I'm not a drummer particularly, I'm just not great at it. But I do understand the push and pull of that. Like, the reason bands will, play 7, 8 or whatever, 13, is because essentially they're just playing a straight rhythm and then they just drop a beat and it creates a push and a pull sort of tension, which is what everybody likes. You're sort of vibing and moshing away, and then all of a sudden you're on the offbeat and you're like, whoa, what happened? And it sort of pulls you out of things, keeps you interested, right? And so, I feel like, honestly, talking about that, one thing I've always thought is that, there's definitely bands that write to very specific measures, but I also feel like a lot of times people read way too much into that sort of stuff, unless you're trying to learn the song or you're trying to notate it or something like that. I don't know that there's all that much reason for counting measures like that, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of bands, when they're writing, they'll just be playing a riff and then they'll be like, we should just drop a beat here and it'll just sort of kick everybody's ass, right? And I think a lot of times that's all it is. You can try and quantify it and rectify it in your head and figure out exactly why they're doing it. And it's a fun exercise, and I'm sure a lot of people really get enjoyment out of really breaking apart things like that. But on a fundamental, just listener level, all you really need to know is that, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. It's just a more interesting texture, right? You can count it all you want, but it's that drop beat is really the only thing that matters in the context of the rhythm, right? So that's why you typically, I don't typically count measures, because I feel like 9 times out of 10, I'm just going to get corrected anyway, because I'm terrible at doing it. But also, I just feel like I prefer to just listen to the rhythm and the texture of it as a whole, rather than trying to break it down to such a degree of understanding, and no judgment on those that do it. Always impresses the hell out of me, particularly people who aren't drummers. I see Elizabeth from Charismatic Voice doing it all the time, where she's like, oh, they did like a bar of, this and that. And I'm like, that's cool. But to me, it's just like, I prefer to focus on other things. So, but you can't talk about Periphery without sort of, talking about that sort of mathematical element of it. And man, do they just get it right? Just, there were so many parts through that. Like, it'd be really easy to just make everything super complicated and just show off all of what you're capable of. But occasionally they'll just bring it back to a really simple groove and a simple riff, with some tight melody and harmony and some really melodic vocals and stuff in the middle there that just surprised the hell out of me, because I wasn't expecting it. Vocally, there were some real interesting choices too, melodically, that I'm not 100% sure somebody who was like more of a singer would have made, which again is actually is fundamentally a lot of fun, because that's why you listen to different bands, to listen to how other people interpret how to do things musically. He also has some great vocal chops too, like, going from a lot of those screaming parts to having some interesting articulated sort of leaps vocally, like not in the screamed parts, but in the actual sung parts, which I wasn't prepared for. That was really cool as well. It was interesting to discover that they don't have a bass player, but I've already covered that. Why they have 3 guitar players, I'd have to do more of a deep dive. There wouldn't be the first band. Iron Maiden has 3 guitar players from memory. It's not uncommon, but you might question how it all fits together and how it becomes necessary. It could have just been the case of like the bass player was like, look, there's no point me playing bass, I'm going to play guitar. And they just switched out instruments. But yeah, like, wow, what an interesting first dive into Periphery. I enjoyed it. I could talk about this all day, but you know what? We try to keep our videos under a certain length. So again, thank you so much for the recommendations. They've been coming thick and fast, particularly for Periphery and bands like this as well. And yeah, I really enjoyed that one. As always, if you feel like I've added any brightness to your day, feel free to buy me a coffee. But also, you know, if you haven't already, a lot of my viewership aren't subscribers, and I'm doing my best to convert you. I'm doing everything I can. So, you know, if you haven't already, click like and subscribe. And also, if you find someone else might enjoy this, please share it with them as well. I'm trying to get the community bigger so that we can do more things with it. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.